Welcome to another Lazy Shell tutorial video. Today's topic is the Effects Editor. Effects are all of the cool things that happen on screen when you use certain specials or items or when enemies use spells. They're used in conjunction with animation scripts to make magic happen. To start, I'll briefly mention that this editor does have a palette editor, graphics editor, and a tile editor. The basics of how to use those editors are covered in other videos, but I'll mention just a couple of notes about them that apply to the effects editor specifically as we go along. To start, there's the drop-down menu, which lets you choose the effect to edit. The image number is a set of graphics, tiles, and palettes. Each effect has its own unique image number, unless the effect is just a palette swap of an existing effect. For example, Star Rain and Dark Star share the same image number, but Star Rain uses palette 0 and Dark Star uses palette 1. Each image has 8 palettes associated with it, labeled 0 through 7. This palette number is which of those palettes this effect uses. Again, Star Rain uses palette 0, this first one here, while Dark Star uses palette 1, which is this second row right here. Down to image properties, the editor is kind enough to let you know how much space you have available. Obviously, the more tiles you use, the more graphics space you need, etc., more space you need. Like I said, each image has 8 palettes associated with it. Palette size refers to how many of those palettes you can actually use on one effect. The number of palettes usable is this number divided by 32. Since this number is 64, that means the number of palettes we can use is 2. Graphic size determines how many subtiles are usable in the graphics editor. This number divided by 32 is how many subtiles you can use. To prove that, let's open up the graphics editor. Now let's look at where we've stopped using subtiles. Okay, the last subtile we use is subtile 69. Now remember that subtiles start at tile 0, so this is actually 70 subtiles used. So if we take that graphic size amount, 2,240 divided by 32 equals 70. 70 subtiles used. BPP codec affects how many colors the effect can use. 4 BPP allows the effect to use all 16 colors present in a palette, while 2 BPP only lets the effect use 4 colors. Generally, the bigger the effect, more likely it is to only use 2 BPP to save on space. Remember that the Super Nintendo is limited as to how much activity it can display on the screen, so sometimes using less color is the difference between a spell working and not working. Down here you can choose to shift the animation. The higher the X number, the more it's shifted to the left. Higher Y values shift it up. Usually when an effect is called to the screen by an animation script, that script itself tells the effect what position to be in. However, you can use this to adjust its position globally. It could be that an effect is always off-center, simply due to the way it's drawn, so you can use this to apply a universal shift to its position every time it appears on the screen, rather than trying to account for that off-center amount in every animation script that uses it. Down at the bottom, we have the effects animation. Over to the right, we have the molds editor. Molds are the individual still frames that make up animations. Some spells, like Shocker, only have one mold. It's just this big lightning bolt. Others use multiple molds, like Crusher. Let's take a look at Crusher. You can see Crusher's different molds have more and more of it out of the ground. You can use these commands to add, delete, copy, and move molds. You can change the molds being used and how many frames each mold lasts. If you want to see what it all looks like put together, use this play button. Back up here to the molds editor. Like levels and sprites, effect molds are made up of tiles. If you click this button here, see the tiles that make up an effect. To the left of that, you can change the size, in tiles, of the effect. Over to the right, you have the tiles you can use to draw the mold. You can change these tiles using the tile editor right above it. The tile editor works the same way it does in other editors. Again, we went over the tile editor and graphics editor in the Battlefields video, so I won't go into those here. Over here, similar to the frames editor down below, you can use these commands up here to add, delete, and copy molds. From there, you can use these tools to edit the tiles of the mold. Let's look at importing spells. As I've mentioned before, although you can edit images in Lazy Shell pixel by pixel using the tools provided, it's often easier to import an image rather than create one from scratch. So let's go through an example of importing an image. Take the spell Shell Slam from my Super Koopa RPG ROM hack. It's a giant shell that falls from the sky to squish enemies. It replaces the Star Rain spell. Let's go back to that spell. Star Rain has two molds. There's the normal yellow star, and then there's the angry star that gets tinted black when enemies use Dark Star. This first mold is the one we want to change. First, you click on this icon to import an image. Then you choose the image you want to import. It'll ask you if you want to update the effects palette based on the image you're importing. You can try to do this, but I'll warn you, Lazy Shell doesn't always get it right. You may still have to edit the palette manually. Okay, as you can see, the importing process is rarely perfect. It didn't turn out quite right, but that's alright. If you look at this tile window on the right, you can see that all the pieces of the shell are there. We just need to assemble them. In the tile window, this first tile has some little graphic on the top left we don't want, so let's get rid of it in the tile editor. But first we need to see what subtiles we have available, so let's pull up the graphic editor. You can see that the shell's graphics are added in here. When they stop, we have some additional graphics here. These are the leftover graphics from Star Rain. When you import graphics into Lazy Shell, it takes up only the amount of space it needs and nothing more. So when you're overwriting graphics, if the image that you're importing is smaller than the original image, you'll have some leftover graphics. Now what we want is a blank subtile. Since we're not going to be using Star Rain, we can overwrite one of these subtiles that's still being used by Star Rain. So here I'll take my select tool, just select this entire box, and delete it. Now we have subtile 49 is blank and free for us to use. Press OK to save changes. Now let's edit this tile in the tile editor. For this subtile here with this little corner graphic that we don't want to see, we'll change its subtile index to the one we just freed up. There you go, looks much better now. Press OK to save. Now let's edit these tiles here so that it actually looks like the shell we want it to. Okay, now it looks good. Looks like an actual shell now. Now remember that Dark Star uses this second mold here, which is still messed up. But rather than reinvent the wheel and assemble the whole thing all over again like we just did, what you can do instead is you can just delete this mold and then copy the first one that we did. Now you have two molds that look the same. And there you go. That's how you import a spell. Now keep in mind that this is pretty basic. All this is going to do is change star rain so that instead of a star falling from the sky, it's going to be a shell. It will still basically do the same thing as the original star rain, it'll just look a little bit different. It'll have a shell instead of a star. Of course, there is a lot more you can do with spells, but anything beyond changing the image has to be done in different editors. A full new spell will use a combination of this effects editor, the attacks editor, allies editor, animations editor, and sprites editor. Maybe even the audio editor if you're feeling really creative. But those are all subjects for another time. Before we go, there's this button at the top. Clean unused animation data. This makes the editor look for things like empty molds and unused tiles with no subtiles in them. Basically, it finds wasted space and cleans it up. The original Super Mario RPG ROM actually has quite a bit of wasted space. Just like it says when you click on it, using this option will free up thousands of bytes of free space, which is nice. There's more room for your effects. And that's all there is for the effects editor. As always, if you find these videos helpful or you just want to support the channel, please consider subscribing. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.